There are two readings this morning. The first comes to us from Paul's letter to the Philippian church. We're in chapter 4, reading verses 8 through 9. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Our gospel reading is from Luke chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Listen for a word from the Lord. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Okay, we had something different up there. All right, that's all right. There are a number of things for which I've been especially thankful for over the last few weeks. Things that were given to me by members of this congregation. Dave Anderson dragged me out of bed early one cold morning recently, sat me in a combine with Daryl Durder, and allowed me to experience an Iowa corn harvest for the very first time. Actually, I not only rode in the combine, I also spent some time with Dave in the grain truck that rolls alongside the combine, and I traveled with Mikey in a semi over to the nearby grain elevator. No, I didn't drive the semi, or the grain truck, or the combine for that matter. They don't trust me that much yet. Next year, Dave, next year. But it was nevertheless an awesome experience and an honor to participate, and I am truly thankful. Just a few days prior to that, Susan Cross graciously offered to give Anita and me an art and sculpture tour of the ISU campus. And Susan was good at it. She could probably lead a large group tour if we ever wanted her to. She patiently led us through the various campus buildings and outdoor sites, explaining to us the importance and the symbolism of many pieces of artwork. And along the way, in the library, we discovered a portrait of our own George Burnett. Did you know that he's been honored in that way? I'm calling the gallery where he's pictured the Wall of Fame, but I know it's officially called something else. And we were all tickled, and I was thankful. And then, just last Saturday, Mike and Mary Kitchell, who were going to be out of town, offered to Anita and me their ISU football tickets. We thought for 2 seconds before accepting that generous gift and froze our tushes off with the thousands of other fans that afternoon and evening watching the Cyclones beat Texas. We were grateful for that. We were grateful for Mike and Mary's gift, and I was thankful. And I'm pleased to say that in each case, with the combine, with the art tour, and with the football game, that I subsequently reached out and thanked each of these wonderful people. But I have not always been such a good thanker. There was a time in my life when I would instead take most everything for granted, supposing that I deserved it, or imagining that I had somehow earned it. How arrogant I was, and how ignorant. And most of all, what I was at those times was not thoughtful. And not being thoughtful leads to being unappreciative toward God and others. Because in order to thank, we must first think. It has always been the case. Contemplation leads to adoration. Consideration leads to appreciation. This was equally true in Jesus' day. Take the story of the 10 lepers. This was a people group in dire straits in the first century, with desperate needs, on the outskirts of their culture and living on the margins of their society. If there was ever a group that you would think would be thankful for their unlikely healing and deliverance, it would have been this group. Indeed, we read that as Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, trekking the border between Galilee and Samaria, this group of lepers, and leprosy here can mean various skin diseases, this group of lepers cries out from a distance, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." This plea was from a distance because Jesus, we are told, had just entered a village. And because leprosy was then believed to be highly contagious, lepers were not allowed in villages. They were required by cleanliness laws to remain outside of local villages. So it is for this reason that they yelled out, "Hey, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." Mercy is a fascinating term. It most often applies to someone who has done something terrible and therefore is deemed undeserving of God's love and attention. In other words, these lepers who cry out for Jesus' mercy do not themselves believe that they are worthy of God's blessings. They knew from the Hebrew Scriptures and from their own culture's taboos that they were unclean, impure, and blemished, and that therefore they were unacceptable. And they believed that they were not only acceptable to other people, but they were in fact unacceptable to God. Nevertheless, they cry out. And that, it seems to me, is the key of this whole story. Well, it's one of two keys, the other one which we'll get to in a moment. But this is the first key. Feeling oppressed, stereotyped, and discriminated against, this marginalized group of lepers nevertheless finds it within themselves to cry out. And in fact, that is the story of the entire Bible. Think about it. The Israelites cry out to God for deliverance. Moses himself cries out to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." In exile in Babylon, God's people cry out, "How long, O Lord? How long shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" And then in the New Testament, the blind beggar cries out, "Jesus, have mercy on me, a sinner." Later, when Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey, people alongside the road cry out to him, "Hosanna, Jesus." Why, even Jesus himself cries out while he's upon the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And as God's people, we also cry out. Why? "Because in this world you will have trouble," said Jesus, "but take heart, for I have overcome the world." Are you crying out to God today for one reason or another? Am I? So that's the first key. In the midst of persecution, in the midst of marginalization, in the midst of trouble, we are invited to cry out to God. We are encouraged to do so because God's people have always done it. How are you crying out to God today? Do you feel that you need to? If so, will you? Will I? As a result of the lepers crying out to Jesus, he heals them. That is, he cleanses them and makes them whole. Yet it happens in an interesting way. Jesus doesn't wave a magic wand and heal them straight away. Instead, Jesus sends the lepers to the priests, whose job it was to verify when a leper had truly been cleansed. Check out Leviticus chapter 13 for more than you ever wanted to know about leprosy and its various manifestations. And then we read that the lepers, as they went, were cleansed. As they went. Not as they stood there, not while they waited around, but as they went, as they obeyed. That says something about obedience. Namely, that we as people walk forth in our lives in faith, going where God instructs us to go, perhaps not being fully healed or even fully equipped when we leave, yet believing that God will equip us along the way as we're obedient, as we follow, healing us as we go. And thus, as Christians, we venture forth in hope. That's exactly what the 10 lepers did. It took great faith on their part. And yet, please notice that all of them did it. All of them initially had that faith. And that's why it's not the second key to this story. Faith is universal. It's what comes afterwards. After they are cleansed, that is the key and that makes the difference in this story. Similarly, I often tell couples in premarital counseling, it's not necessarily what happens in your marriage that has the greatest impact on that relationship. An argument, an infidelity, the death of a child. These things, as tragic as they are, happen. It's what we choose to do after that event has occurred that will forever define the relationship. Do we communicate? Do we reconcile? Do we respond? One of the lepers, one does respond. The other 9 lepers do not. And I deliberately use the word lepers again here because think about it. When they are healed, they are no longer lepers. Yet the one who turns back and thanks Jesus remembers vividly that he had been an outcast and marginalized and despised by others. Before he runs off, therefore, exulting in his newly cleansed status, diligently reporting to the priest and thereby seeking an official confirmation, he first thinks deeply about what he had been. He doesn't even technically follow the letter of the law here, doing what Jesus had told the lepers to do. Instead, this cleansed leper follows the spirit of the law, that is, his heart, his love for God. This healed leper thinks about all of this, and because he does, he immediately returns and thanks Jesus for his cleansing. You see, my friends, it's easy when we have become something new to self-righteously turn our back on what we once were, instantaneously discarding our roots and forgetting who or what has successfully brought us from there to here. It's incredibly difficult in those moments to think, I am thankful. I am grateful. I am going to stop right now, no matter how excited I am about moving forward, no matter how much is going on or how much needs to be done, I'm going to pause long enough to offer thanks, to give praise to God. It's the same reason why I think it's important at every meal, and especially before the yearly Thanksgiving feast, to stop and give thanks. It's really a function of thinking as much as it is an act of thanking. Along that line, one final thing is happening in our passage of Scripture this morning, something that we often leave out when we examine this biblical story. Near the very end of it, Jesus says of the former lepers, "Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" This foreigner. You see, this thankful former leper was in fact a Samaritan, a racial half-breed. So do you see, not only had he been an outcast because of his skin condition, he was a double outcast due to his race. Maybe even a triple outcast because of the religious beliefs that went along with his race. And maybe that's why he thought more deeply than did the others about his healing at Jesus' hands. Perhaps it's why he was more grateful than were his counterparts for his new status. For you see, it's often the immigrants to a nation that are not less, but more devoted to their host country than even some natives are. It is often the foreigner who is not some thankless freeloader, but rather a deeply grateful patriot. So this Thanksgiving, when we're gathered around the familial hearth and our bountiful tables, let us be thankful for the gifts of newness and cleansing and healing that the Lord has given us. And let us be thankful for the immigrants and the visitors that God has placed around our nation's table, and be willing to cry out on their behalf when it is within our power to do so. For whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And when you think, thank God also. Amen.